All right, guys, time for another look at center, and this time we are going bargain bin hunting. We are looking for a backup because we need a backup right now, as is anyway, right? Like I said, both of our primary centers from last year, Blythe and Fuller, are free agents. So even if you spend big money on a starter, you're going to have to get somebody to be the backup as well. Now, I guess it could be Joey Hunt, but I think you'd rather have a little more security at your backup center position than that. So, if the team decides to go outside their current crop of players and free agents to address the need, or if maybe they decide we want to draft our starter but we want to sign a veteran backup, here are some guys that could fit in. And there are quite a few. Most of them, however, are of very limited quality. So just understand that going in. I'm going to start with a guy who's kind of on the fringe. It's John Feliciano from the New York Giants. This is a guy who's about to turn 31 and has been playing a pretty decent amount for the Giants in recent years, and the results have been okay. Like, this guy was a fourth round pick, so he's got a little bit of a pedigree, and he's been playing a decent amount since he found himself in the NFL. It hasn't been terrible. Last year, he played almost 1,000 snaps for the Giants. PFF grade was about 58, better pass blocker than run blocker. The numbers are passable. You go back to 2021, he played about 450 snaps. Grades were below average, but not at all terrible. Year before that, he played about 600 snaps. Grade was passable. Like, this guy is either not quite good enough to start, or he's not quite bad enough to be a backup. I don't know which one it is. I personally would not want to bring him in as the starter. This guy's a little too heavy and slow-footed for me. He's a certain kind of center. I don't think he would fit in well in the Waldron offense. I want a more mobile center, somebody who can play in space, somebody who can throw blocks at the second and third levels. When I look at a guy who's 325 pounds and, by the way, about to turn 31, I start to say, okay, that's probably going to be a guy who is limited in what he can do at the position. But even if you're bringing him in as a backup, which, that would be okay, right? If he's the backup, then at least you can say, hey, we have a veteran backup with a lot of experience. I don't know. It just seems to me that he's played just well enough to be like a bad starter, as weird a concept as that is. Like, a team that just wants a competent center for a couple of years is going to pick him up, pay him a little better than backup money, and he won't be on the market as a backup. He probably wouldn't go to a place where he knew he was going to be the backup. So, probably not, but I got to talk about him briefly. Another guy would be Rodney Hudson. This is a guy who's been a starter in the league for a long time, but I think those days are over. Rodney Hudson had one good year in Arizona, and the last 2 years have been not so great. He only played 300 snaps this year, and the grade was meh, barely average. Year before, he played 800 snaps, and the results were average. You got to go back to 2020 to find a year where he was good. He's going to turn 34 this offseason. Party's over for Rodney Hudson. If he wants to stay in this league, he's either going to be, I think, one of the worst starters in the league, like somebody who goes to a team like Houston and starts because they don't have anybody else, or he's going to be a veteran backup. And theoretically, I'm not against the idea of him being a veteran backup to a rookie center in Seattle. He's a little heavier than I like. He's a little slower than I like. And at that age, he's going to be even slower. So I'm not really feeling it. But if we got him, I would definitely be able to say, okay, we have a workable insurance policy in case the rookie goes down or doesn't play well or isn't ready or whatever. So there's some value in being like the Mike Upati of the offensive line, I guess, where you bring him in. And unlike Mike Upati, who you expected to start, Rodney Hudson wouldn't be expected to start. At least I don't believe so. I would hope not. So, not bad. And then at this point, you start kind of wading through a bunch of pretty bad options, just trying to find the best possible option. Like guys like Scott Kessenberry, who started for Houston last year, played almost 1,000 snaps, but was really bad. Now, there are reasons why he was really bad that have nothing to do with him, of course, but he was still bad. So, experienced, reasonable profile, 310 pounds, decent 40 time for a center. Youth, I mean, he's going to turn 28 in a month and a half here. That's not bad. There isn't a whole lot here except for a decent amount of experience. He's played a little bit, but he got his chance to shine in 2022 and he had nothing. You got to go back to 2019 to find a year where he was playable. So as a backup, sure, but man, you don't want him to come into the game ever. I'll say that. So you're not super excited about that. You got guys like Tyler Larson, who played about half the season for Washington last year, and it was not terrible, I guess. It was okay. Go to previous years, he only played a little bit, very little. Can't really learn anything from that, but I guess he belongs in the league, and, backup would be okay, but he's so big. 335-pound center. Yeah, I'm not really that interested in that personally. Got a guy like Will Clapp, who played some center for the Chargers this year, almost 350 snaps. Grade was meh. Pretty one-sided here in terms of what he was good at and what he wasn't good at. And before 2022, there isn't a lot to talk about. He was not particularly good in previous years in very limited snaps. So this is kind of another guy who would be okay, he fits the profile somewhat. He's relatively young, so maybe he could get a little better. But he's very slow. He has no draft pedigree, so I'm kind of passing on that one too. Got James Ferentz from New England. He played a little bit of center for him last year and played bad, but not terrible, I guess. You go back to some previous years, he was pretty bad in 2021. He was bad in 2020. This is kind of what you're reduced to when you're starting to look for centers in this price range. These guys who are going to cost 1 year, $4 million. This is kind of what you're wading through here. You're just close your eyes, throw a dart at the dartboard, and hope it lands on a guy who ends up being serviceable. Nick Martin's kind of interesting to me. He's light. He's less than 300 pounds. He's not that old yet. He's about to turn 30. He's got good draft pedigree. He was a second-round pick once upon a time. He was terrible this most recent year, but it was a relatively small sample size. You go back to the last year where he got to play a lot, back in 2020. He was passable. He was workable. He was, at the very least, worthy of being in the NFL. He was playing at a backup level, which that's what we would need in this situation. So Nick Martin, I think, is a workable option as a backup center, but the fact that he hasn't really had a chance to seriously play the last 2 years is obviously a bit of a turnoff. I think that if you want the opportunity to get a guy who might surprise you positively and maybe even develop, there's one guy that kind of caught my attention who you would sign probably as a backup and then see what he could maybe earn. Maybe you sign somebody like a McGovern to a 2-year deal, and maybe a guy like Corey Levin can take his job by year 2. That's possible. Corey Levin, relatively young still. He's not going to turn 29 until right before the season starts. I like the profile. Relatively quick for a center, not too big. Played 250 snaps last year, 68 PFF grade, graded solidly well. You go back to some previous years where he barely played, you can't really learn anything. He literally did not play in the previous 3 years before 2021. 2018, he played a little bit. The year where he actually got to play the most, he actually showed the most positive attributes. He's got a little bit of ability to play at the second and third level. He showed that maybe his best football is here or right in front of him. If you want a backup center with some upside, I think this is your guy. That's it for backup centers for me. That's really all I got. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you see something else here. I will see you guys later. Go Hawks. And we are moving on to a new position tomorrow.